Guys, how is everybody today? Good. All right, guys, and I'm speaking to the whole room when I say this. I'd like you to not pay attention to your computers and pay attention to me. Guys, eyes up front. What we have to do is we have to do a change in course from Monday. We had a couple of folks in this class who were regularly talking and interacting when I was opening up. We have some folks who are not. We're about halfway through Chapter 2. If we get through Chapter 2 and we don't see more people from the class interacting, we're going to stick with traditional tests. If we see more people interacting, we're going to go with the online test. That means, in this class, if you have not interacted yet, if you have not made your opinion known, even if it's not to know, I need you to start doing that, or we're going to have to stick with the traditional way of doing things. Again, we're going with what you guys suggested, but I need to hear your voices in the classroom. You understand? All right, if we can do that, we can hopefully avoid getting into too many tests or other onerous things in favor of more conversational approaches. So I need you guys to be engaged. And we're going to start this off today with a little conversation. And the way I want to do this, guys, to get you primed and ready to interact today. When I call your name, I would like you to tell me what your major is, and I'd like you to tell me why. Why is it your major? Guys, I'll start off. Right now, my major is I'm doing a DBA in organizational leadership. I do it because I love working with nonprofits. I want to be a better leader. So, Adam, what's your major and why?
Healthcare management, and mainly because I've always been interested in the healthcare system and wanted to get into it.
It's a good answer. To be interested and love what you're doing. Elliot, what's your major and why?
Political science and management. Political science because I've loved politics since I was like a kid. And management because you need to know something about business, and my mom told me to take it.
You've thought about this. That's a good answer. Josh, why are you taking this class? Or what's your major? Where's Josh this morning? No Josh today. All right. Jason, what's your major and why?
Like Elliot, actually, I'm a management and political science double major. I picked political science because I think it's just very, very interesting and something that would be really cool to have a career in. And I also picked management because I think they have a lot of overlap because in both areas you're really concerned with stakeholders.
I could not agree more. Kenny, what's your major and why?
Management consulting with an ethics minor. I chose it just because I love working with people, and the main area I want to do is organizational restructuring. So I seen like the good and the bad sides of it, and I want to do it like ethically. So.
Restructuring is not a dirty word. Todd, what's your major and why?
Business management. I like being part of like a team and working with others.
If you had to choose between leading or being a part of the team, which do you enjoy more and why?
You said leading?
If you had to choose between being the leader or just being a member of the team, which do you prefer and why?
Being a leader.
And why?
I just like giving my example.
That's a great way to lead, by the way. That's gets people loyal to you. Okay, Francesco, what's your major and why?
My major is international business, and I would like to work for a company in the international field.
Any particular industry you're interested in?
No, not yet.
It's okay. It's okay to need to figure that stuff out. And Ryan, what's your major and why?
Fermentation arts and administration. I like it because I think making wine and beer is a good expression of art and science. And one day I want to own a brewery, so that's why I'm taking all these courses.
I could not agree more with your endeavor. Thank you for supporting my lifestyle. Emily, what are you majoring in and why?
I'm healthcare management and always thought that healthcare was interesting.
And it's a big field these days in terms of the economy. Guys, if you were to guess, 100% of the United States economy, what percentage is spent on healthcare? 100%. For every $10 in this country that are spent on anything, how many of those dollars go to healthcare? It's not that high, but it's 2. So we're spending 20% of our GDP on healthcare. Highest spending in the world in the United States, and our results fall right in the middle. Something we should be questioning. Emily, what are you majoring in and why?
I'm healthcare management and marketing, and I was nursing, so I was interested in healthcare, and then I wanted to switch over to the business side, so I did that.
We welcome healthcare people with open arms into business, so that's a good choice. Raina, what are you majoring in and why?
I'm marketing management. Marketing basically because I always found myself to be really creative. And management because I have a family company, family business in Brazil, and probably I'll take over that when my dad doesn't want to work anymore.
Good, good. I enjoyed your story about your family business in our other class, by the way, so thank you for that. Rashawn, what are you majoring in and why?
Management. It's like business aspect.
So are you excited about the concept of leading people, of managing people? Like if you say, what's your dream job? What would be what you'd want to do for a living?
I feel like wherever the company needs me to be.
That's good to be versatile, man. Nothing wrong with that. EJ, what are you majoring in and why?
Management, because I like working as a team.
You prefer to be a leader or part of a team? What appeals to you more?
Being a leader.
Yeah?
I like leading by example, stuff like that.
I love it. I love it. Corey, what's your major and why?
I'm MIS, management, and MIS because that's that's where I think the world's going today, like more technology and stuff. And I always had to be good with computers, and management is still I like working with people.
Good answers. Good answers. And guys, by the way, if you had to guess, because we're talking about labor in here, out of all the jobs that currently exist 10 years from now, what percent are expected no longer to exist? 40%. We're talking about 40% of existing jobs will not exist in the next 10 years. So having a technology background is a good thing. Sarah, what are you majoring in and why?
Did you say Sarah?
Yeah, I said Sarah. I'm looking in the wrong place.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm double majoring in marketing and management because I always wanted to do this.
Good idea. HR is going to be a big part of the strategic solution. I'm still learning all your names, guys. Emily, what are you majoring in and why?
I'm hopefully going to triple major in marketing, management, and economics. I chose marketing because it's the creative side, and marketing management is a good combo. And economics would be like studying graphs and trends, which will help me with marketing.
Excellent. And we're going to make that triple major happen. And who do we have next here? We got Justin. What are you majoring in and why?
I'm marketing management. Just kind of always interested in it.
Nothing wrong with that. Pursuing your interests and finding your dream job are good things to do. Avery, what are you majoring in and why?
I'm a management major also. I chose this because I've always been interested in like the business aspect of things, and I like working with a team too.
I get the impression you're interested in startups too, because that's kind of some of the work you were doing already, isn't it? Weren't you working with like a startup company or something, a tech company? I saw something you're posting in the HR class. Whoever it was, it sounded
yeah.
Creative company.
Yeah.
Creative company. So, all right, Jared, what is your major and why?
In marketing management, and I like strategy and working with other people.
Excellent. Good answer. Tanner, what's your major and why?
Marketing management, and I'm getting a minor in exercise physiology.
That's an interesting combination, man. What brought in that combination?
All on my own job.
Good goal, man. And it's interesting when you think about the big mega gyms and the big chains out there, how you can go for a more micro kind of market. What's your market going to be?
Not like a corporate type setting, like you're allowed to drop weights in my gym and swear and stuff like that.
There it is. There's no alarms are going off. All right, and I apologize. I'm learning everybody's name yet. Now I'm looking at Summer, right? Yeah. Summer, what are you majoring in and why?
Healthcare management because I was nursing too, but I just found myself like more interested in the business side of it.
A lot of people who are in healthcare end up working for business people, so that's a good thing to do as well. And Adam, what are you majoring in and why?
I'm majoring in management, and I've always had the idea that I want to own my own business in the future. So management will allow me to be able to do that and have the skills to take care of everything in that aspect.
Very versatile major. You guys are making good decisions. Guys, to jump in for today, we're going to be continuing Chapter 2. Thank you for sharing your career aspirations, by the way. A reminder that today our Chapter 1 exercise, your opinion about unions, is due at midnight tonight because we don't have Monday deadlines in this class. I'm asking you, if you have not yet, to complete any of the first chapter activities that are online so that we can get everybody all together, because from here on out we're going to be moving a little more quickly. Guys, we left off talking about the Knights of Labor. Now, the Knights of Labor were different from most union organizations. I would like you guys, in your own words, when we start talking about stereotypes of unions in 2019, when you think about what you've learned about unions, what are some stereotypes or what are some common things that unions are all about? What industries are they associated with? Yes. Coal. Coal, for sure. Heavy industry. What's another industry that unions are associated with? Yes.
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Yeah, that's a new and emerging industry. What other industries are they associated with? Yes.
Education.
Education. Typically, what are the goals of unions? When we say their goals for their rank and file, what are their goals? What are they trying to get for their members? Yes?
Improved benefits and working conditions.
Yeah, we want to get people better pay, better working conditions. They basically are biased toward the working person. They're saying we are not part of the company, and we certainly are not inherently just trying to elevate people. The Knights of Labor, well, they're trying to elevate wages, but the Knights of Labor had the idea that we're going to turn people into better people. I would remember this aspect. I would write it down or otherwise fall it in your vault. One of the aspects of the Knights of Labor that is different from traditional unions is they allowed management or members of the company to be part of the union. Does that work in a union management scenario? Why or why not? Yes?
It wouldn't. It's a conflict of interest.
It's an absolute conflict of interest. The example would be if we decided to completely take down the barriers, and I said to you guys, well, you guys can be members of the faculty as well, and I'll also be a member of the student body. There are no reporting lines. It's hard to set what are good priorities. What's in the best interest of students, for example? Well, you guys all want good grades. What's in the best interest of faculty members is we want to do a good job educating and make sure we're maintaining standards of quality. Sometimes those things become at odds. The Knights of Labor were trying to get people to essentially buy in from both sides. They also tried to use arbitration, meaning that they would go to some sort of required mediation, arbitration type process to avoid going to strikes. And the reason why this happened was because if you've got people from labor and management on the same team, it's very hard to go against your own team if you're all members of the same team. They tried to not have an adversarial relationship, and they had basically the idea of educating their employees and making people elevated, as opposed to actually instituting strikes and other kinds of more severe kinds of strategies. Well, here were some of the reasons that the Knights of Labor failed. They basically, number one, thought that they could do better by partnering with management than they ultimately could. They really also thought that all workers, regardless of their level, rank, and skill, could all get along in a single organization. Let me give you an example. Let's compare this to teams. The people in different sports carry different levels of ability in different specialties. That's a yes or no question. They do. The people who work, who are members of one team, let's say the football team, train differently than somebody's a member of the water polo team. What's different about the way those people train?
The environment.
I'm sorry?
Environment.
Well, the environment for sure. One is doing a lot of training, probably in cardiovascular and water-based training. The other, depending if they're defensive, offensive linemen, whatever their position is, are doing more lifting and strength training. They have different areas of specialty. It would be very difficult to represent the exact same interests of both those teams that have very different skill sets and very different ways of getting along. The Knights of Labor, however, wanted to be everybody's union. They wanted everybody to be part of the club. If you make everybody part of the club, pretty soon nobody's actually part of the club because we're all together anyway. So they overestimated the shared interests of the employees. They also overestimated the idea that employers really cared about people. So, in addition, right now, if I were a member of a labor union and somebody were trying to dismiss me, if I were getting fired, what do I have the right to have when I'm going through that process? What are some of my rights? Just from your understanding right now. Who's there to protect me? I'm a member of a union. Who's there to protect me? Yes?
Your union reps?
Yeah, other members of the union. My collective bargaining agreement. All these things that cover me. We're going to be getting more into that. Basically, the Knights of Labor didn't have a strong process there. If the company wanted to fire you, for example, or accuse you of doing something wrong, they have as much say in that union as the union had in the first place. There was no true adversarial relationship, which is ultimately why people didn't believe in this union in the long term. And finally, the people who were the rank and file were not having their voices heard because the people who were running the union, who were running the Knights of Labor, were idealists and people who weren't necessarily in touch with reality. So that's ultimately why that union failed. Guys, we're on our home path now out of the Civil War era and moving into World War I. The 8-hour workday movement was the cause of a very famous riot called the Haymaker Riot. I just want to know by show of hands, has anybody ever heard of this riot before? It's a seminal moment in the U.S. labor industry. We're going to show you a video about it in a moment. But one of the reasons this riot happened in the first place, people were required to work a 10-hour workday in the Haymaker plant. So basically, it was a 10-hour workday, and the employees were saying, we want it reduced to an 8-hour workday. We figured that we deserve to have a reasonable working schedule. Ended up being a riot. So we had several policemen who were killed, turned into rioting, and the people who organized the riot itself ended up being tried and hanged. So we're talking about people actually put to death for this, and the lack of ability of the Knights of Labor to really come to an agreement and to make their voices heard and to show themselves as a strong union ultimately destroyed faith in the Knights of Labor to be able to do anything because they were the prevailing union at the time. I'm going to show you a brief video about this to show you how bad this took place over working conditions. The fact that people wanted an 8-hour workday, which is what we enjoy in the United States today, by the way. 40-hour work week is the standard work week, and it did not exist prior to the 20th century in most legislation. What happened here, because we had the Knights of Labor, who were very chummy between the companies and the quote-unquote union itself, we had people who basically had no clear lines of opposition. One of the points that the speaker in the video made, too, that there were more radical elements that were starting to form in the United States at this time, people who had even more socialist or communist ideas. Keep in mind, this is the same era when ideas like Marxism were starting to really come out of Europe, the idea of collectivist types of cultures. And so here we have a union that is espousing capitalism, but it doesn't have a strong viewpoint between labor and the union itself, trying to manage these kinds of issues and do it in a way that's very civilized. Sooner or later, it had to blow up. To this day, we still don't know who threw the bomb or what their actual intention was. It could have been somebody who was anti-union in the first place. We don't honestly know. But the bottom line is people started turning anti-union in a big way at that point in time. Then we get into the 1886 era. This is the same era. We have people who were members of skilled unions. Guys, what was one of the hallmarks of the Industrial Revolution? When we had people going to work in the factories, are we talking skilled or unskilled labor here? We're talking about people who were unskilled, who were coming out of the farms and fields, who were ultimately being trained how to run machines for pretty low wages. The Knights of Labor represented those folks alongside all these folks too. A lot of the skilled craft unions are saying, well, wait a minute, this doesn't work for us. If I've got more skills, for example, what do I believe I might be entitled to? I got skills. So what am I entitled to compared to somebody who does not?
Higher pay.
Higher pay and better working conditions. So what we're saying here, the American Federation of Labor is basically saying, hey, look, we're going to form our own union of people who are more skilled, who we don't want to negotiate next to these people who are not skilled because we want to be separate from them. They started basically forming their own competing unions. And when we said they had decentralized authority, it meant instead of having one national branch, we're going to put it out to local branches to be able to some extent to negotiate their own contracts. And we also came up with something we refer to as exclusive jurisdiction. And what that meant, for example, if we had a union that they claimed a given region as theirs, they would be the sole union for that industry in that area to centralize some sort of power. As opposed to the Knights of Labor, what these guys were basically saying is it's perfectly acceptable for us to exert economic pressure to get our demands. When we're talking about unions, how does a union apply economic pressure? How might you do that? Yes?
Boycotts and strikes.
You got it. People who are boycotting and striking, otherwise inhibiting a company's ability to operate. The Knights of Labor were not for this. They were not for strikes. They were not for doing these kinds of pressure moves. The American Federation of Labor was all for it. By the way, the AFL is the first part of AFL-CIO, which is the largest conglomerate of unions in the United States, which we're going to be talking about later. They also like the idea equitable treatment, meaning that people should be treated well and should be paid for their efforts. Unlike the Knights of Labor as well, who wanted to elevate people and make them more cultured, elevate them as human beings, these guys were very utilitarian. And it basically meant we're going to use our power to get better wages and better benefits for our employees, the people who are part of our organization. And they were really the first group to really apply these pressures toward collective bargaining. Meaning, if we come in as a group, it's tougher to negotiate with us as a group than as individuals. Some of the strategies these guys used were strikes. They also got involved in politics. Guys, if you are a company, or let me rephrase that. If you want to influence politics in 2019 and you're a company and you want policies to be biased toward your interests, who do you hire? Who as a company do you hire to influence politics? It's a word that begins with an L.
Lobbyist.
It's a lobbyist. So before the era of formal lobbying, these groups still would try to get involved in politics to get people to go to their demands. What would that mean? Would me getting chummy with a local politician? Could some money have exchanged hands? Absolutely. So they were trying to also improve their own image by having politicians in government advocate that unions were okay and good for the community. If you follow politics, guys, if you follow the money, you sometimes will find the roots of the decisions, and it's no different here. So, guys, all this was well and good until we come to another flashpoint moment known as the Homestead Incident. Where is Homestead, guys? Who knows where Homestead is? It's not far from here. Where is it? It's near Pittsburgh. What was also a location where we had Carnegie Steel. Carnegie Steel was one of the biggest employers, of course, Dale Carnegie. Who is Dale Carnegie good friends with? I'll give you a hint. This building is named after him. Charles Schwab. Those guys ran in the same circles. These were the titans of industry. And so this was a lockout. Now we know what a strike is. When employees go on strike, what's a lockout? What's a lockout, guys? Give you a hint. It's in the name. Yes?
When employers lock employees out.
That's exactly right. If you can't come to an agreement on wages or labor, you can lock people out as well. So this was a lockout of the Carnegie Steel Works. And so you basically had this guy named Pinkerton, who was working for Carnegie at the time, who was trying to infiltrate the crowd. And they basically were watching this stuff unfold. And eventually there was a clash between workers and the National Guard who had been brought in to secure the company in the first place. So management was trying to keep the lockout in place because they were at impasse with labor to basically say, you're going to do what we say you're going to do. We're going to break the union. And this particular strike was going on for about 5 months. Because of the violence that erupted and the people who were killed by the National Guard, the unions actually enjoyed a pretty good PR standpoint from this. So basically what happened, guys, in layman's terms, the employees were locked out. Violence that was initiated and stoked by people working for the company erupted. People from the union were killed, and the press gravitated to being on the side of the union and the working person. Pittsburgh to this day is still associated as being a working person's town. We're going to watch a brief video on this one as well to give you some context for this. Over 100 years. What does this way that this incident unfolded tell us about America at the time?
Very violent.
Violence definitely was something that was a more common thing that we would see. If we had a strike today, if we had the local teachers union on strike at your home school district, is this the kind of negotiation or response we could expect? Could you imagine in 2019 if we had a private militia essentially coming in and start shooting at unarmed protesters? What would be public response?
Very against that.
On top of the fact that somebody's probably going to jail for using lethal force against people who were not physically threatening someone. I'm not saying that the guys in the union here were not an imposing presence. They certainly were. But did that warrant the use of deadly force? You know, what else has changed in this time? So this is the 1890s. What else has changed in the United States since this time from a government standpoint? What's different? Well, for that matter, what's culturally different? We've changed a lot since then. What's different, guys? Help me out. Yes.
We have a lot of laws on the books on how, like, you know, strikes and organization can and should work.
Absolutely. And during this period of time, it was not uncommon for the average person in an area even like this to openly be carrying a firearm, because that was a different time back then, yes.
I feel like coming up to that, people nowadays have more rights than they had before.
Absolutely. Guys, what we're building up to really is the 1930s and the Fair Labor Standards Act. We haven't gotten there yet. We're still deep in the history of the early days of unions in the United States. But what this did essentially for the union movement was created a flashpoint incident where all of a sudden people who had nothing to gain by feeling one way or another are saying, wow, these are people who are trying to earn a living, who were locked out of their employer, who got shot for doing nothing other than trying to make their views heard. So it did turn the tide of public opinion against the companies and more toward organized labor. That gets us into the 1890s, guys, and we start talking about the Pullman strike. Now, guys, back in this period of the United States, we had just completed something called manifest destiny. Has anybody ever heard the term manifest destiny? I know you have, Elliot. What's it mean?
Manifest destiny is kind of the reason that the country in part was expanding, because people thought it was their right to expand and move into different places. And it really is how the West Coast movement really got its momentum.
And what powered that?
Some of it was religious, some of it was, the idea of thrill, adventure, and exploring new places. There's a couple of things behind it. But also, people had nothing on the East Coast because the East Coast was getting packed, so they had to expand.
I would also argue that a big part of it was powered by the railroads. And the fact that prior to this time, what was our primary means of transportation prior to the railroad? How did people get around? Horse and buggy. That's exactly right. So all of a sudden, instead of traveling several miles in a day, we could travel hundreds of miles in a day. So the railroad expansion westward. By the way, in this region, the main laborers on the railroads were Italian Americans, who experienced a whole lot of discrimination in this region as well, as people who were considered to be second-class citizens. Italians and Irish in this part of the country. Out west, who powered the westward expansion in terms of the railroads? What ethnic group? Chinese. The Chinese. So we're talking about people who were immigrants to this country who were really powering this industrial revolution in terms of transportation as well. We got to realize that railways were going to be the future. Before we had massive highways, before we had cars, before we had jet planes, the rail was everything. Well, the American Railway Union basically said that we want to unionize. We're going to put pressure on this company called the Pullman Company. The Pullman Company itself is one of the largest owners of railroads and railways at that time. Now, at this point in time, there was a big debate about whether or not, if you worked for the railroad, that you should be allowed to unionize. Why? Well, because it carried everything, including the mail, guys. These days, most of us don't even check our snail mail on a daily basis, but that was a big part of the civilization of the United States at that point, that we had mail service. So basically, we had federal mail on these trains, and we started putting troops on these trains to make sure people couldn't go on strike, because so many people in the country were depending on this as their information and supply lifeblood. What this would ultimately produce in the long term was the idea of railways that were specific to, or unions that were specific to railways. And you remember we talked about the air traffic controllers in a previous class? Why did Reagan fire all the air traffic controllers? You remember? Yes.
Because they went on strike and they had signed an agreement.
They had a no-strike clause because the country had seen air travel so vital to the security of the United States. It was very similar, and that kind of no-strike clause has its roots in the rail era, where basically the union itself basically was not to go on strike. They chose to go on strike anyway. And at that point, the National Guard and other groups were sent in to break the strike because so much emphasis was placed on the value of the railway system. A lot of this stuff, even though Labor Day's got its roots in Canada, this incident of the federal troops and the U.S. president essentially trying to break the railway union ultimately is associated with Labor Day as well. And I know we're doing a bunch of videos today, but I think this stuff adds some context to what